in the
This
chat really
conference will
quickly.
now be recorded.
Really quickly, I'm going to throw in the chat the audience overview if you haven't gotten a chance to see that yet. So yeah, use that to help you follow along with the slides and also have the information for later on.
Cool. So hi, everyone. I'm Jess Gonzalez. So I'm a cannabis and intellectual property attorney. I entered the cannabis space through IP. So at a firm, I used to manage the firm's domestic and international trademark portfolio. I've been a consumer of cannabis for about 12 years, but similar to Mary, I only really came out in 2019 to my very traditional immigrant Ecuadorian family. So right now, I co-manage the cannabis practice group at the firm, and I also lead the intellectual property practice group. I'm also general counsel for Minorities for Medical Marijuana, which is a national nonprofit that Mary is also a part of. Mary is the chapter president of New York. So I'm very honored that I've gotten that position last December. I'm also on the state and federal policy committee of the Minority Cannabis Business Association as well. So what I'm currently doing is helping to review some legislation and policy, both on the federal and state level. And then on the business side of things, I sit on the board of advisors of QA Canna, which is a quality assurance company based in New Jersey. It's currently working with insurance companies to help underwrite different quality assurance policies for cultivators and processors. So I wear a couple of different hats, but very happy to be here.
All right. So if everybody is here, we're going to start again. Thank you for joining us. If you need to follow along to catch up and you're just joining, that's awesome. But we're going to get ready and go forth. Discussion. So how did your journey into cannabis start? Jess, I can share mine a little bit. I'll let you start. And then we can get into why you became a lawyer, how many years you've been a lawyer, and what is your favorite, most challenging thing. So, you know, that's a 3-part. So, you know, if you can start about how you really got forth into this, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, sure. So I came in through cannabis through a very big existential crisis about my life. So I was a young attorney, still am a very young attorney, but I was even younger then. And so this is about early 2017. And I was doing intellectual property, but I really didn't find too much of a passion for it. And I was working with some of the largest musical instrument companies in the world and some very big musicians as well. So everybody, you know, that looked like a very sexy job to everybody on the outside. But I really had, you know, like I like music, but I didn't really give a shit about musical instruments. So I started to think about what I was really passionate about. And I think that's a very hard question typically to ask yourself, especially with me being in my 20s. So the better question was, what has remained a constant in my life? And that's when I realized that, well, at that point, I'd been smoking weed for 10 years. So that was the same year that Governor Murphy of New Jersey was elected. So I decided that, you know, I was working for my boss who had created a very niche area for himself in entertainment law. So I figured if this bro could create an area of himself and be very successful, then possibly I could too. So I brought cannabis as an idea to the firm. They were not supportive. And so I had to eventually take matters into my own hands. And out of pure necessity, I created my own law firm that focused solely on cannabis, hemp, and CBD. And I did that for about a year to truly immerse myself in the space. So I practiced what I preach, and I took the skills that I already had and I pivoted towards the cannabis space, and it evolved from there. And now I'm here.
And how many years have you been doing this?
Okay, so cannabis specifically since early 2017. As a lawyer, I believe I'll be entering into, so I'm in my 4th year as a lawyer. So half of my time as a lawyer has been spent focusing solely on cannabis.
And what is your favorite thing and then your most challenging thing?
My favorite part about my job is the people. I get to meet the coolest people. I get to work with some very cool companies. I'm very happy that a lot of the clients that I service are minority or women-owned companies, and that was really what I set out to do when I became a lawyer. Legal services are really expensive. nobody likes lawyers. And so I really wanted to change that. And I really wanted to give some folks the opportunity to gain access to legal services. And I figured if nobody was doing it, then I would do it. And kind of having that attitude of I'm just going to be a sponge and I'm going to learn from everybody and I'm going to go to as many events as possible. I've met some of the most inspiring people of my life, and many who became very, very good friends of mine. So the best part about being a lawyer is that I get to touch on various different things. So one day I could be working on a trademark application. The next day I'm working on a supply agreement. Then I'm working on protecting seeds and genetics from another company. And so I get to do various different things that I'm not sure what other job would have enabled me to do it from a legal standpoint. So I like contracts. I think they're good thing I'm a lawyer, so I like them. But it's really opened the door to meet really fantastic people that I don't believe I otherwise would have met. And I think that the cannabis community really brought together some really great folks that I have been very, very fortunate to meet. But I think it's also because of my willingness to always learn from a lot of folks. I think a lot of lawyers enter this space thinking that because they've been a lawyer for X amount of years, they know everything. And I've never come into it with that attitude. I've always really been open. And so I think with that perspective, it's really brought a lot of cool people to my life. The most challenging part is that there's no playbook to go by. So the hand holding is extreme. And I worked with a lot of startup companies who, you know, some folks who are really first time entrepreneurs, first time business owners who are not only entering, entering into business, but are also entering into a business in a very highly regulated space. So it's been challenging in talking to people and telling them, you know, there's certain things that you cannot do yourself. You cannot go on LegalZoom and find yourself a good cannabis contract. If you really want to protect yourself, then you can't really use some of these ordinary mechanisms. I tell folks, I'm like, those contracts are a good starting point, but they're not geared towards cannabis. They do not have the provisions in there that are adequate to protect you in the long run. So sometimes
and also, quick thing to add on to that, even if you look at a LegalZoom opportunity where you're like, I want an LLC, I want to incorporate my business, that's still not it, unfortunately, too, right? Like from a general, like, why do you feel like people feel like they can get quick answers through that? And what are the real differences people need to know, just not including cannabis paperwork, but all paperwork when it comes to LegalZoom versus actual counsel?
So I think that a lot of folks, they really like to skirt different lines, right? So everybody assumes that lawyers are extremely expensive and they're probably going to tell you things you don't really need to do. And also I think people have very bad experience with lawyers. A lot of my clients come to me and they've had tremendously disastrous experience with lawyers. So I always say, I'm like, all these lawyers really cramp my style because here I am, you know, really trying to help, but they come in with this sort of skepticism. And so in order to kind of avoid that, they really want it. They're like, well, I just see it online if I can do it with any other company. But if you're forming an LLC for a cannabis company and you had somewhere with cannabis in the name, I've always told some folks, I'm like, you can try to go get a bank account. It's going to be a lot harder. You're really cutting yourself off at the knees before you even start. Because if you're, you know, trying to go into a plant touching, before you even touch the plant, before you even think about touching the plant, you're not going to be able to get a bank account. Or if you do, your maintenance fees are ridiculous, right? And then the same thing with insurance. You haven't even started your company, you're not really doing much, but your insurance carriers are not going to start questioning you into that. So if you form an LLC with some of these different services, they may not protect you in the best way because they're not cannabis specific or cannabis oriented folks. Typically it's just a machine behind that that's really, you know, pushing this out. And so what I always try to warn folks is cannabis is not a game that you want to skirt on. This is really not something where you don't want to, you know, dot your I's or cross your T's. If you want a chance at success in this industry, you have to do everything by the book because there's a magnifying glass on you. In this industry, it's not like every other industry, but I think because folks haven't yet experienced what it's like to be in the cannabis industry, I think it's one of those things where when you experience it, you understand why it is so much harder to be successful than it is in a couple of other industries.
So you touched on a couple of things that relate to the conversation of what your work is like, right? So, you know, outside of what you mentioned, which are going to probably come up in these last two questions on this slide, what is your day like? You wake up, like, what regiment do you make for yourself, given that you mostly, especially right now, work out of the office or remotely? So what do you do for yourself?
So being a lawyer is really stressful. It's a very non-forgiving job. And so I have to take 2 hours every morning to myself. So to some people think it's a long time, but I really needed to be able to fully reset. I typically get to the office about like 9:45, 10 o'clock in the morning. And then when I do, my days really range between trademark work and general corporate work. I also, will go to either, certain networking events, or, be able to do certain educational things like this. Thankfully, and I'm in a unique position. This is not the typical day for many lawyers, but I have found myself in a unique position in that because I co-manage the practice group, I have a lot of autonomy and a lot of leeway that many young associates probably wouldn't have. I don't need to ask for permission to go to an event. I don't need to ask permission to bring on certain clients. That may not be the case for you, but because of the risk that I took and that fact that I bet on myself for an entire year, I really learned what it was like to bring on a client, to do the work for them, to deal with the billing issues. And that's a lot of experience that a lot of young attorneys don't have, because typically when you go to a law firm, they sit you behind a computer screen and say, do the work, bill this amount of hours per year. And those billable hours that you may have heard about, they can really put a damper on a lot of your plans. So thankfully, due to the fact that I took such a huge risk, I did pretty well for myself. I fully immersed myself in the industry and I hustled really, really hard. I am able to have that responsibility that a lot of lawyers don't. So a lot of my days typically spent, I'd say 70% legal work, the other 30% either doing educational events, marketing events, networking with folks. And that's why I tell them, like, I have one of the best gigs, because part of my job responsibility is to continue the networking and continuing to meet all of these awesome people, such as Mary, such as Nadir, who are doing extraordinary things. And I think sometimes people see a lot of these accomplishments and think that it came very easy, but this industry is also very hard. And so the fact that you guys have able to really, be extremely accomplished in such a short amount of time, right? But cannabis is like dog years, right? You've been in cannabis for like 2-3 years. It really feels like you've been in it for 10, because of everything that it takes you through. But that's the benefit of my job, but it's also my passion. So I tell people, I self-educate a lot. A lot of what I learned didn't come from law school. It didn't really come from law books. It came from a lot of self-education, but it's what I love. So if cannabis is something that you love, and if you're interested in the law, then this is a really perfect combination of two things that you could really push forward with. But it does take time to really get to that point. And I'm still what I believe to be still in the infancy stage of my learning well. But it just takes time. And I think that if you really do have the passion for it, if it's something that you care about more than just, I like smoking it every day, then I think that this could be a very successful field for anybody.
What is it like to do this type of law in terms of cannabis and intellectual property? What does that mean in this space?
Yeah, so intellectual property comes in a couple different forms. So you got your trademarks, you got your copyrights, you got your patents, and you have trade secrets. So what's cool about intellectual property is exactly how it sounds. You're protecting something that really only exists in the mind of the consumer. And that's what I always thought was so beautiful about this field, is the fact that it's not tangible, that brand that you create, that goodwill that you create, that reputation only exists in anybody's mind. It's not something you can touch. It's not something you can put in a bank. The intangibleness of it makes it much harder to protect and makes it much more imperative that you do protect it. And so I deal specifically, I don't do patents, so I deal specifically with trade secrets, trademarks, and copyrights. So if folks here have companies and if you have a brand name, I really urge you to seek federal trademark protection for it, because what you do is you claim national proprietary rights in that name, and you can prevent other users from using it. I've sent about 7 cease and desist letters in these past 3 months. And that can get really expensive for you, because a lot of these companies, they don't take the time to look at other companies that may have a similar name, an identical name. And in cannabis, you know, a lot of people have Canna in the name, right? We have Cannaclusive. My Instagram is Cannabogada, you know, from like 2-3 years ago. Now that this industry is really getting saturated with so many brands, you know, it's really important to differentiate yourself. But federal trademark protection is a way to protect yourself from the onset. If you are investing time, money, and resources into creating your brand, the least you can do is file trademark protection for it. And that way you get national rights. You don't have to use it in every state, but you do get national rights. As for copyright, that's more for artistic works of art, right? So with copyright, it's just, it's an original work of authorship fixed in a tangible medium. So if you were to right now take a piece of paper and write one sentence, you have a copyright on that immediately. Right now, whether or not you have protections to go and sue somebody, that's different. You need to file for copyright registration. But a copyright exists the moment that it's original, work of authorship, tangible, fixed medium. And so when you're looking at your graphics that you design, or if anybody you know is doing your logos, your website, your promotional materials, your advertising materials, all of that can be copywritten, and it's important in this space that you maintain the rights to it. So if you hire a graphic designer to prepare you a logo or a graphic, it's really important that they assign it to you, because by definition of copyright, the moment they created it, they became the owner. And a lot of folks don't know that, and so they have their friends and their cousins and this and that, and down the road, when you know, when your shit is popping and your graphic is used all over, best believe somebody's going to come knocking and say, actually, I created that. And I know, because I've been in many of those situations with a lot of my clients. And trade secrets, trade secret law is very nuanced because it typically goes state by state. But trade secret, the easiest way that I can say it is it's basically something that is secret that your competitor doesn't know, that provides you with an advantage based on the fact that they don't know it. So the best example is the Coca-Cola recipe. They were deciding years ago whether or not they wanted to patent it, whether or not they wanted to keep it a trade secret. Patents only exist for a certain period of time, depending on what kind. Trade secrets can last forever.
They were deciding years ago whether or not they wanted to patent it, whether or not they wanted to keep it.
I think somebody should press on mute. There's some sort of feedback. Everybody on mute?
Can someone go on mute? Thank you.
So that's what trade secrets are. So a trade secret can last forever. As long as it is kept secret, it can last forever. And that can be a process, it can be a recipe, it can be customer lists, it can be pretty much anything that you have to designate it, and there's certain requirements, but that can typically last forever. So you have to depends on what type of intellectual property you're looking to protect, how long you're looking to protect it for, and the economic benefits of protecting it as well.
So I'll say when we filed for our trademark at Cannaclusive, it took about 1 year and 2 months. Actually, no, 1 year and 4 months to get our official. Like it took a minute. So you're not gonna, and there's even a backload of trademark issues that go between 2 and 5 years right now with the federal government. So if you're like, yo, my trademark's gonna be ready in 2 months, 3 months, I'm gonna tell you right now, especially today, that's not gonna happen. So you do have to, you know, you don't email your lawyer every month like, where is it, where is it, where is it? I'm telling you right now, when I filed for mine with Cannaclusive with my 2 other co-founders, it it took a year and some months. And we were told that straight up by our lawyer that it's going to take time. And we were lucky, you know, so, you know.
And actually that a year and 4 months is actually, it's beginning to almost look like the norm for marks that have the word cannabis in them or canna anything. And the reason for that, the USPO, they designated a special team for cannabis and hemp related applications, and they're still trying to figure out what to do with it. So I'm so happy you made that point, Mary, because a lot of folks typically like to wait, or they have the mindset of, well, I'm just going to use this and I don't think anybody's going to come after me because I'm too small and they're not going to notice me. Like that's not even a good business decision at all, to place your name and risk the fact that maybe at some point down the line somebody may not notice. Because trust me when I tell you, they notice. And lawyers are, you know, as trademark law begins to evolve in cannabis, it's going to be a huge point of litigation. So if you have something creative that you came up with and you think it's the bee's knees, then at least take the time to protect it, because eventually your brand name, your trademark, your logo will become one of your company's top 3 assets if you're a successful company. That's typically how it goes. So when folks sometimes ask me like, well, what is the point? You know, why would I do this? It's because it's an asset, and you don't think it's an asset because it's intangible. But that's why it's so important, because it can transcend states, it transcends state lines, it transcends geographical boundaries. You can place your trademark on the internet and it can go anywhere. So it's important that you get trademark protection as early as possible.
So we have about 4 questions that I was going to wait till the end of the presentation for, but I kind of want to make sure this is applied to this particular section. So we have one question where you mentioned that cannabis in a name for an LLC would lead to an uncomfortable time with banks and other vendors. Is that the same case for the word smoke?
Yeah, pretty much at this day and age, everybody is attuned to the cannabis space. And listen, your company name and your trademark are 2 different things. They are not the same thing. So you can call your company one name, but operate under a different name that is your brand name, right? So I always tell people, like, look at Procter & Gamble, look at Unilever. They have brands underneath them, Lysol, Dove, all of this. Those are their brand names, but the company name is either Unilever or Procter & Gamble. So don't think that just because you can't LLC or incorporate your name that you can't therefore operate under a different one. You can just operate as a DBA, doing business as.
And I'm going to get to the next question. What are the legal actions that can be taken into consideration if someone takes your copyright after you've trademarked?
So if someone takes your so those are 2 different things. So let's see, so if you've trademarked your logo and if somebody uses it, and if you have federal trademark protection, then you are allowed to sue them. You do have legal rights. If you do not acquire trademark protection, you have no rights to you have some common law rights, but you can't actually sue them. And so that's really what federal trademark allows you to do. You can go sue them in state or federal court. Which is pretty different, because trademarks is run by the United States Patent and Trademark Office, and they're a federal agency. So you could go to federal court, which sometimes, you know, typically in a lot of circumstances you cannot do. But if you're talking about copyright, so if somebody, you know, if you create something like a graphic or a logo, and then someone starts using it, unless you have a copyright registration on it, once again, there's really not much recourse. But a copyright, those are a lot less time consuming to prepare, and they're a lot cheaper. I think it's like 75 to 100 bucks for your copyright, as opposed to trademarks, which are a little bit more expensive because you need to have a lawyer really do it. But yeah, protections, to apply for federal protections, you basically give yourself now the right to go after them and sue for money.
So thank you for answering that. Next question related to this part of our presentation. So if you have graphics in a name, should you not start using it until it's copywritten?
So if you have graphics in the name, should you not start using it
So
until...
pretty much like until you have a copyright, you shouldn't start using the name that you have. I know that that answer is not correct. It's not what it is, but that's the question we have from someone.
So yes, if we're talking about copyright takes 2 seconds. You could literally go online to the copyright thing and just do it. Whether or not to start using it beforehand, I mean, if you start using it beforehand and somebody does copy it, then you really run that risk. For a trademark though, that's different, because in order to get federal trademark protection in the United States, you need to have used it in commerce. We are one of the only countries in the world with this standard. A lot of other countries, most countries, are first to file. It's almost like a finders keepers. You found the name, you filed for it, it is now yours. In the United States, it's based on who used it first. So dates are extremely important. So if you do have a trademark, the earlier, like a logo, the moment that you start using it in connection with your specific goods and services, you can file a use-based application, and then you have to keep track of your first date of use. So if there's something that I can really give away to you all is eventually, if you want to form your own company, you're going to need to file trademark protection for it. Keep very accurate records of the first time that you used it. So if you are a service, the first time that you promoted it. If it is a good, the first time that you sold it. Because that way, when third parties try to come at you and say, actually, I used it first, now it's a fight between who used it earlier and who can provide the most amount of proof. And typically, people cannot provide proof of their first date of use. And that's always a huge issue. So definitely keep very accurate records of when you first used it.
Thank you very much. We're going to go to this part of the presentation, and then I'm going to save remaining questions for later on. So what's the roadmap? I think you actually went over this.
Mm-hmm.
How did you gain your cannabis experience?
I gained my cannabis experience at first through self-education. So I would wake up every day at about 5:30 and study until I had to go to work. And then I would read up about cannabis during my lunch break. And after work, I would go to an event. So when I first started, I told myself that I was going to try to go to, at the very least, 5 to 6 events per month, to try to learn as much as I can and to try to learn from as many people as I can. The most amount of my learning came from my conversations with folks who have been in the game a lot longer than I have. And so I always defer to those people who really took the time to educate me. I remember sometimes being around conversations and not understanding, I think somebody said broad spectrum once, and I freaked out. I had no idea, what that was. And so what I did was I wrote it down. I went back home and I made sure to educate myself on the vernacular of it. And because there wasn't that many resources out there that were compiled all in one, I went on the Greenleaf Fundamentals course. I took the Fundamentals course. I got like 30 pages of notes that came from it. But really, I just wanted to learn the language of it. But most of it came from talking to people and sitting people down. And I think for the most part, people are willing to help you if you're helping yourself already. And I think what, and Mary, I'm sure you could speak to this 100%, is that folks come at you and are just like, Mary's favorite line, right? Let me pick your brain. And I'm inundated with LinkedIn messages, DMs, Facebook messages, emails asking, hey, can we sit down? Can we grab coffee? And typically when I'm like, hey, try to, go to this event, I'll be there. The answer that I always get is, oh, well, I have to work. And that's when I'm just like, well, I'm sorry, I really don't know what to do for you, because if this is so important to you, you must make it a priority by any means. Like, cannabis is not a game where you can kind of sit in the back and like hope that it happens to you. Like, you have to be on the front lines there, right? And so, be willing, definitely ask for help and talk to people who have that experience, but also understand that they are also being inundated with the same messages. So if you can show that you've done something, you've written something, you've taken the time to research, you've taken the time to put something out there into this world, people are going to be much more willing to help you. But you cannot, just be like blindly asking people to sit down with you all the time, because everybody's precious commodity right now is time. And I think people need to be respectful of it. So help yourself first. I always say is participate in your own rescue. So invest in yourself, self-educate, and then, you know, it'd be very different if somebody came to me like, hey, Jess, you know, I saw your webinar. You had a question about this. Can you please, you know, enlighten me on this? Because I'd be like, all right, you know what? You took out the time. If you had to pay for it, you put out the money for it. And then you also took the time to find my email, jot it down, prepare this question. And I'm sure you were nervous about it and you rewrote it like 5 or 6 times, but I can see that effort, right? And I'm sure Mary, like you can definitely tell the difference.
Yeah, for me, I have a lot of people that I do mentor overall in a lot of crossing industries. But the big thing that I say to them, and the big thing that I say to them, if I like think that they're just wasting their time and my time, is, hey, if you're not doing the self-work, then I don't really think it's going to work for me being a part of your mentor journey, right? So even when it comes to like people that want to consult with me, you know, I give them 15 minutes of something to think about. And if after that they don't want to pay my hourly rate, I don't really trip. I try to operate without thinking about making myself available to everyone. Like, it's not healthy to do that in general. And you have to really create boundaries in everything that you do, especially when you work remotely, when you have your own budget to manage, when you are your own boss. So it's not a matter of saying people don't want to help you when it comes to this, but I moved across the country to Cali from New York. I'm not even from New York. I'm from Detroit, Michigan. I have a chronic illness that cannabis really aids with. And, you know, like the only reason why I really came back to New York was to support the efforts that were going on with trying to make social equity an item in this state. But even with or without that, all my work is really connected to marketing, working with businesses. So if people say, hey, can you help my business? If they want me around long term, I demand equity in their companies. That's just what it is. So,
Right.
you know, no one is saying they don't want to help, but you got to want to grab your own knowledge as much as possible, which is key when you even talk about lobbying and legalization, right? So how do lawyers take what they've learned and connect it with lobbyists from an advocacy point and legalization, just given the work that you do specifically with M4MM and MCBA?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so a lot of people hear about, you know, lobbyists, and everybody's like, what do? They, you know, they go and they talk to the legislators and really try their best, you know, to convince them to, you know, write legislation as their client see fits and whoever's paying them. But there's also lobbyists who just do it, you know, just kind of for their own purpose and mission. So it's funny because a lot of people have over time have been like, Jess, are you a lobbyist? Can you be a lobbyist? I'm not a registered lobbyist, so I wouldn't ever call myself a lobbyist. But what I do is I do help certain groups with language of legislation, and then I provide my comments and I provide my recommendations based on what I've seen and based on a lot of the struggles and the challenges that my clients are facing, and you know, then they take that and, you know, and do as they will. I'm actually in the process of becoming a registered lobbyist with the state of New Jersey, as my firm is now enacting a government affairs team that I will also help spearhead in New Jersey as well. But lawyers are really helpful because we understand how to read the language. If you've ever looked at statutes, they're not easy to read. They're really fucking annoying to read, actually. And it's written in a certain way when people are like, oh, why is it written that way? It's written that way for a reason. When we go to law school, we are taught for 3 years how to read a completely different language. And then it is our duty as lawyers is to then be able to translate that language so that other folks, you know, can understand it. So those commas that you see, those semicolons that you see, those, you know, herein, after, wherefore, they're there for a specific purpose, because if you use other language, it's then open up for interpretation. So when you see these really run like long running on like sentences, they're made to be read that way, but typically the general public, it's very difficult for them to read. And I completely, you know, understand that. And they're also very long. So lawyers have really, you know, it's really a good time, I think, right now to be a lawyer and to enter the cannabis space because of the so many different regulations and legislation between federal and state, right? And so when we're working now in this gray area, and this is what we were trained to do for 3 years, is to work in a very gray area where the law may say one thing, it could be interpreted as one thing. And so the language that you see is created that way in order for there to be the least amount of interpretation possible. There's always be room for interpretation, but that's the way that it is crafted. So when you are reading a lot of this language and it's confusing to you, that's how it was purposely written. So it has nothing to do with anybody's intelligence. It just has to do with your training, right? There's probably a lot of, you know, like I have no idea really about like, you know, marketing, right? Like I would never say that I would know marketing, but I'm sure Mary knows a completely different language than I know. But I know how to craft a contract in a very specific way because I have been trained to do so. So if law school gave me anything, it's the fact that moving forward, any contract that I read, I can interpret it and I can also craft it to the benefit of either myself or my client.
When it comes to this, what challenges do you face in a federal situation versus a legal federal versus, do you mean local?
Yeah, we would federal state. Sorry about that.
So when it comes to federal versus state battles, what does that look like in the most short-term way you can describe it? Because that could be a whole other presentation.
Yeah, so it's almost as if, you know, you have the federal law being the parent, the state law being the child, and the federal law saying, all right, I'm going to let you do what you want as long as you do it in the way that we want it to, but I still reserve the right to go and give you an ass whooping if you don't do things correctly. That's probably the best way really that I can put it. And so when you are at a state level, it's, you know, cannabis companies are not immune to federal prosecution. There is no law, there is nothing that states that you are immune from it. There are certain documents where, you know, they've advised the Department of Justice to not allocate resources towards prosecution of operations that are operating under their state licenses or their state regulations. But at the same time, they can still come in and they can still raid and they can do what they want. And there's really no legal recourse because at the federal level, it is still a Schedule I drug. And so when I am dealing with my clients on the state side, you know, my disclosures for my engagement letters are about 2 pages long because I have to notify all my clients that it is still federally legal. And technically what I am doing is aiding and abetting an federally illegal activity. The state provides lawyers with very little protection. So in New Jersey, the ethics rule states that we can assist with medical state licenses and medical cannabis operations, but it says nothing about adult use. So the moment I start advising for adult use cannabis operations, I am operating outside the purview of my ethics, and I'm also going in contrast with federal law. And so this is why a lot of more of the professional services have really been very hesitant to enter the space, but a couple of us have really taken it upon ourselves to kind of just say, well, fuck that. How do you want a regulated industry without those that help with regulation? And while nothing really, I don't believe anything, you know, really will happen to us, we are still risking our license by doing such. And if the bar, which is the lawyers' governing body is called the bar, if they did want to come down on any lawyer, they very well possibly could, in the same way that the federal government could come down on any state if they wanted to. So it's just important that you follow all your state regulations to a T. You have a magnifying lens on you at all times. I always tell folks this. My insurance went up by 400% because I was practicing cannabis law. I was still doing the exact same thing. Trademark law, corporate law. I went from paying a very small premium when I had my own law firm to paying almost $600 a month for my liability insurance, just so that I could be protected. And that was enormous. It's an enormous jump, and that's only because there's only 2 companies in the US that insure lawyers for practicing cannabis. So I had no choice, and the difference was like $10 between them. So that is definitely an issue that a lot of lawyers are still facing. But really what it comes down to is just the best that you can do is just really stick to your state regulations, become very, very familiar with them. And if you are operating in the space and you're not familiar with your state regulations, then you really need to get on that.
That's why she's a lawyer, guys. You fucking this shit up, Jessica. This is amazing.
This is the best shit ever.
That's awesome.
And just to clarify, you're talking about insurance, like liability insurance for lawyers,
Like,
correct?
yeah, exactly.
Okay. Sweet.
Because actually, for them in New Jersey's medical bill, they have it where those medical providers who provide recommendations for patients, their premiums cannot go up according to New Jersey state statute. But it says nothing about any sort of other professional services. So hopefully we'll get there someday.
I want to make sure we make time for stuff. We're going a little bit over, so thank you again. So Jessica, how do I know if my lawyer is trash?
Man, so yeah, they like most art. No, I'm joking. I think that if you're looking for a lawyer in cannabis, then I highly recommend that you find one within those circles. There are so many different groups. Like if if you're in New York, if you're in New Jersey, if you're in another state, there's a lot of groups. Find the lawyers who are attending those events, who are taking the time out to do so. Because what I found is a lot of my clients fired their lawyers, because what they did was they went to very big firms and they thought that they were going to get very good work product. And essentially you don't, because those lawyers, though they've been practicing for 10, 15, 20 years in a space, but if you're not operating in cannabis, then it's very difficult to understand what you can and cannot do, and what is actually going to put your client at risk. Because really what we're doing, we're protecting and we're mitigating risk as much as possible. So if you are not up to date, and like it takes a while to be up to date, because as a cannabis lawyer, I'm responsible for knowing what happens in Oregon, Colorado, Massachusetts, Vermont, Florida. There's really no other field of law where you have to be apprised of what's happening in other states, right? And Mary, I'm sure for you as well, for marketing, you need to understand what's happening in all of these states all across the country. It is a very big lift.
Well, to jump into this, I'll say right now, someone in passing asked, what are the pros and cons in cannabis? And I'll say it right now, a lot of people are capping. And if you don't know what capping means, they are lying their ass off. So a lot of people talk a good game, make up credentials because the industry is so new, and you be falling for the okie doke, which I think is, even though cannabis is small and still vast, it's really, really highly prolific in the space, right, Jess?
Yeah, no, definitely, absolutely. And there's also a lot of consultants out there that I'd like to warn people about as well. Yes, very big air quotes. And actually what I found is people rather hire consultants than lawyers, just because of the title. And so what I just do advise is that do your due diligence with anybody. It is so easy now. You can just Google somebody and find out, talk to people about it. I've had people who are like, hey, Jess, like I chose you because I spoke to 5 people about you, right? There are people who they're vetting. So vet whoever you're gonna give your money to protect something that you're really gonna be making an investment in, right? Attorneys are not cheap. They are definitely pretty expensive. So make sure that you look into them, ask about them. If there's nobody in the cannabis space that has ever really heard of them, then that could also be a big flag. But I think if you talk to a lot of people in the space, people can recommend you. Most of my clients were all from, probably the majority were referrals from folks in the space who I had either done work for and who had trusted me to do so. I think it's hard. There's not that many lawyers who practice cannabis because there's not such thing as cannabis law. It's just more how cannabis touches every facet of the law. So how it touches corporate law, how it touches environmental, how it touches IP. And so, thankfully I started out as general corporate IP attorney. So I didn't really have to change my designation too much, but you may have an attorney who was a litigator for years, but has no idea how to fucking put together a contract. So they could have been like the best goddamn litigator in court, but there's two types of attorneys. There's a transactional attorney and there's a litigators. Litigators are in court and they fight. Transactional attorneys prepare the contracts and they do all of that paperwork. So I always tell folks, I'm like, I'm not a litigator. I do not go to court. If there's a problem with the contract, the litigators take care of it. I make sure that there are no problems with the contract from the beginning. I'd much rather bring people together in a negotiation than fight about why that partnership, went to shit. So there are two different types. So make sure that if you are choosing one, if you're trying to go and fight someone, then find yourself a litigator. If you're trying to somebody to create some deals for you, find yourself a transactional attorney who has experience doing such.
So I'm going to get to Q&A. Thank you again, Jessica. Thank you all 31 of you for rocking with us. We are approaching a run out of time, so I'm going to go through the questions that we have. So I think if you got something you want to slide in here that hasn't already been asked, because I know we've answered a few of these questions as we've gone along, please let us know. So when it comes to trade secrets, can you apply these to land race strains, meaning someone found a brand new strain no one ever seen before, and they want to be able to apply trade secrets for it? Is anyone open to use it, or can that become somebody's IP?
Yeah, so just remember that trade secrets only stay trade secrets if they stay secret to a few designated folks. So if there is a specific strain that you are doing and you want to make sure that you maintain, the trade secrets over it, then you have to designate it as such. Meaning when you are talking, let's say, to your grower, you have him sign something that he understands that this is a trade secret. When you provide him the document of the specific genetics, that it is designated in red that this is a trade secret, that you also only let people know about these specific genetics on a need to know basis. And so you have to maintain its secrecy the entire time. The moment that it gets out there into the public, you lose all trade secret protection. So if Coca-Cola, if that recipe somehow gets leaked somewhere, they lose all trade secret protection. I mean, granted, they have enough of a brand that they built it up, but they will lose it. So make sure that if you are emailing it to somebody, that it says trade secret, confidential, do not share. You have to make sure that you take these precautionary measures because trade secrets, there's not some place that you can go and register a trade secret, not the same way as a trademark or a copyright. A trade secret only remains a trade secret if it is completely secret. So share it only on a need to know basis, document the fact that it is a trade secret, make sure that your shit is password protected, make sure that if it's a file, make sure that it is locked in a room with a security code that only you know. And that's all of these measures are how you can eventually prove that it is a trade secret. If one of your employees decides that they want to go rogue, then you can say, well, these are all the steps that I instituted. What happens is people just assume that everything is a trade secret just because it's within their company, and that is not true. So there do need to be designations, and there are steps that you do need to take.
What banks do you know of, just by name perchance, and thank you for answering that question, that have access for cannabis businesses between New Jersey or New York?
So the one that I know of is BC Bank, BCB Bank in New Jersey. They have a couple of them. They've been very vocal about their support for cannabis and hemp banking. The only thing that I will caution is I don't know what their maintenance fees are. The last I heard somewhere it was around $1,500 per month. So you definitely want to check in with that, but that's one of the banks that I did hear about.
Thank you. And I think that this question is a little bit multi-layered, but should potential companies legally file for an LLC or an S Corp or a C Corp? So I'm going to jump in and offer a little things to consider here is that there used to be a lot of benefits in being an LLC with the federal tax code, and those have all been really kind of swept away a bit as the administration shifted. But in most cases, it's good on your own to research the differences between these three entities. A lawyer more than likely is only going to make a suggestion on what you should file as based upon the makeup of your company, right? So are you a sole proprietor? Do you have equity that you're going to be giving to people? Like it all matters in that respect, correct, Jessica?
Yep, exactly. So my favorite line to use is please go talk to your accountant, because I don't know what your financial status is, and you may have different assets in different places that one of these vehicles may be more beneficial to you than another one. So I always say, I provide my comments as to what I think based on, but you have to understand, like, what is your game plan? Like, do you plan on going public in, 5-10 years? Or is it something that you want to maintain a little bit more tight knit? Do you want to have all of the reporting requirements that a corporation entails, or do you want to have the flexibility of an LLC? Do you want to be able to, deduct your employees' medical expenses and benefits on that? Then you may be looking at an S corp. Are you not a citizen of the U.S.? Then you may need to go to do an LLC, because other ones do require citizenship or residency requirements. Depends on how many members. Some of them cap the members. If you have an LLC, unlimited members. You got an S corp, 100. So it just depends eventually on what your game plan is. But with that being said, LLCs can always be converted into corporations, but you can't go backwards. And additionally, your LLC can also be taxed as an S corp if you'd like it to. So if you elect to be taxed as that, then you can also elect that. But that's a conversation with your accountant.
Thank you very, very much. We have 10 more minutes, I believe, right, Nadir?
This is correct. This is
All
correct.
Right. So let's get it popping. Are there any law protecting religious practices that require cannabis? Like Hinduism allows for its followers to use cannabis in religious rites. How would this fit with the laws in illegal states? That's where federal trumps. That's where federal kind of trumps everything in a way, right?
Yeah, and some folks have tried this, right? They've tried it with other drugs like peyote and ayahuasca and things of that nature. But I don't know too much about how that would work, so I don't want to provide any answers with that. I just know that some folks have definitely attempted it for cannabis, but they have not been successful.
Thank you for that. Just plant patents and genetic patents are very hard to come by and only come from asexual plants. How do cultivators and those working with genetics patent their cultivars?
Really quickly, really quickly, I'm just to answer that last question too. I'm gonna drop this. There's a link now that I just dropped in the chat, just about like Religious Freedom Restoration Act and just kind of what people saw, because there was folks doing that, like you said, trying to combine the religious aspect.
Yeah. Oh,
thanks. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, so I'm not a patent attorney, so I'm not going to speak to patents and the plants in that part. There are mechanisms to do so. So actually, patents are one of the only, besides for trade secrets, but the ones you can file for. Patents are really the only one that do allow cannabis, different parts of the cannabis plant to be patented. Copyright and trademark protection does not provide for that.
So a lot of people that are asking patent questions, again, because of what Jess does. I'm going to kind of pass those questions because for her to be able to speak to that, it does require a totally different set of understanding. And Jess, if you could just briefly even go through this, how many different types of lawyers what are the top 5 lawyers that people need to think about when it comes to launching a cannabis business outside of what you do in particular? There's patent, there's IP, like what else is there? There's litigators.
There's securities lawyers as well. So, they deal with when there are any sort of disputes with, let's say in your shareholders agreement, you got some shares and now there's some disputes, you want to bounce and the company's not allowing you to sell your shares. Now you got to bring in a securities lawyer, commercial litigators as well, because I anticipate that the litigation is going to ramp up substantially. In the next few years, in different facets, both with corporate employment law is going to be big. I always urge lawyers who want it. I'm like, employment law is going to be huge in this space. So if there's, if you have any interest in employment law and cannabis, that's a very, very good field to be in. I started off with some labor and employment work, so I have a little bit of experience in that space. But really, for your company, you're looking at, a corporate lawyer, an IP lawyer, securities lawyer, and if you are going to have, a lot of employees and you're looking at a labor and employment attorney. But really, I think what you should be really focusing on is making sure that you have a lawyer that you trust and that you can really establish a rapport with, because a lot of times we may not have all the answers, but we can guide you to people that can. And so, with my law firm specifically, it's like 175 attorneys located in 5 different states. And so, I moved over to a law firm because of the bandwidth that they had, because what I was finding when I had my own law firm is I kept having to refer work out. Right, I wasn't a litigator, so I had to send litigation work. I didn't do environmental work, so I had to send it over to an environmental attorney. So as my clients' matters evolved, I realized that I too had to evolve. So I moved over to, to a bigger firm to be able to provide those types of services. But really, I think your top 3 you're looking at is like a corporate lawyer, an IP lawyer, securities lawyer, at least in the beginning to get, all your business all up and running, and then down the line to really be specific problems.
Thank you so much. We are at the end of Q&A. So I'm going to let Nadir jump in and do his spiel about, let's be smart, hashtag college cannabis.
Thank you so much, both of y'all. This was very invigorating and also obviously very important webinar that we got to do here. So thank y'all very much. Guys, do your imaginary claps. Fantastic. So thank y'all. As very much so, y'all have the audience overview, which has their information via email. So it's info@Cannaclusive. Mary, I didn't give them your personal joint, but I can throw it in there.
If they're interested, my comedy partner and one of my good friends, Coy Hill, and I are going live at 10 p.m. where we're going to get super lit and watch Paid in Full and comment about it on my personal IG. I'm going to go actually do my makeup and my hair for this. It's going to be great. So, yeah. If y'all want to take a break from worrying about the world falling apart, please come over to my personal platform today.
Beautiful. And then, yeah, also, Jess's information is also there as well via email and social. So y'all can use that. We'll have this record, I'm probably going to bundle up all the ones that we've done and send that in an email this upcoming week so that y'all be able to access that, share with friends, and anything else.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks for having me.
100%. Thank you for making time. And thanks everybody else for joining us.
Thank you. Everyone be safe. Wash your hands.
Thank you, Mary.
Go. Yeah. Wash your fucking hands.
Wash your fucking hands.